Can all the speakers sit here in front? I see Tabang. Someone left their fancy phone here. Good morning, everyone. The time is 2 minutes past 10. We supposed to start at 10 o'clock exactly. Welcome and welcome to the Black Business Council event. My name is Hanki Matab and I'm the CEO of the BBC. You see on the program, the program director is supposed to be Miss Linda, but she's not here. So I'm not Mrs. Linda, I'm Hanki. Welcome to this important session. As you know, we have been having load shedding since 2008. And we really need to find a scientific, sustainable solution to the problem. And hence, when you look at our panelists, they are solid, experienced people who will be able to provide us with the necessary solution. And then good morning to our members who are attending online. I would like to call the President of the Black Business Council, Mr. Elias Monare, to welcome you and also give a context of why we're here. President.
Thanks, CE, and good morning, colleagues, both that are present here and the colleagues that have joined this meeting online. And then I think also I wish to extend our appreciation to all the speakers from different organizations, including even Tabang from the Department of Mineral and Resources to be present here on behalf of the Minister of Energy. Colleagues, we have arranged this gathering today, the Energy Indaba, as the Black Business Council, given the current conditions of energy crisis that we are faced with. In any given time or day, we don't have energy either for 4 hours a day, and in certain areas across the length and the breadth of the country, they might have a situation where there's no energy for days. And for them, whether you talk about load shedding stage 4, 6, 3, 2, 1, it means nothing, because the fact of the matter, they don't have any energy in one form or another. And the reason why we thought I should then give a context so that we need them to understand that the engagement is not something that have started yesterday or last week, because there are a number of committees that were established by government through NETLEC, the National Economic Development Labour Council, even during the time of the late Jabu Mabuza, and may his soul rest in peace. Those committees, basically, they didn't deliver anything in terms of addressing the current load shedding and blackouts in whatever form. And those, again, committees that were established, they cut across government, intergovernmental departments or ministries, including even stakeholders from NETLEC, labor, government, business and communities. And again, there were a number of proposals that were submitted to the department and even to the presidency for consideration, and nothing basically then happened in terms of addressing the load shedding. And I think the reason why I'm raising that context is so that we need then to understand that in as much as we think the proposal that have been presented, let's say last year, July, is not new. So that, again, we need then to understand and configure that as an organization, our participation in the energy crisis is not something that started last year, July. It started early in 2008, where we participated NETLEC, and to the extent that even within the presidency, the committee that deals with the energy crisis, we are part of those discussions. And I'm raising that point so that, colleagues, we need to allocate the critical questions that we're faced with, because, again, I need then to remind all of you that when the Director was appointed a few years ago, 2.5 years ago, during the State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa, he mentioned that one of the tasks for the Director is to break ESCOM into three. And again, we need then to start there in terms of a conversation, because if somebody has been appointed to dismantle or privatize ESCOM into three different entities, it then means, it then entrenches a notion that there is no need then to fix and deal with the what I will call it the base load in terms of coal, and that's where the crack of the problem then started, because even the composition of the board that time, they didn't have certain skills in terms of engineering and electrical and other related skills in terms of addressing the coal power stations, and that's where you then see that parallel scenario in terms of, as a government, then pushing the independent power producers in various forms and shape. And we've seen during that period, again, one, there are lots of solar plants that were built, one in Vivo, in Limpopo, at the tune of 1.6 billion, and the second one, it was in Vetkop and also in Limpopo, in Polokwane. The third one is the Northern Cape one. The fourth, it was the wind project in Robben Island in the Western Cape, and other variety of projects that were built. Again, the intention is it was not then to deal with the coal power in terms of dealing with the sustainable energy within the country. And I'm saying it is then important to understand that context, so that when the presenters, they deal with specific and different areas of intervention, we need then to bear that in mind, that where we come from and where we are heading. The third part for me is also the understanding of the geopolitical issues, because if, again, we don't contextualize the politics around energy, we might then think that trade is like a beauty parade or beauty contest, and it's not. We need then to understand the battles even in Syria is based on energy. They fight for a pipe, a gas pipe. The current issues are even in Ukraine and in Russia, whether you call it a special operation. At the heart of that, it is the question of energy also. I mean, we've seen in recent times where the Germans, they're going back to coal. Various countries, Italy, they're going back to coal. And we've been told as a country that we need them to shut all our coal power stations and resort to solar and battery storage, despite the fact that they cannot provide any sufficient electricity or security in any given time. And I'm saying these are some of the issues that in our deliberation we need to factor and understand that context. Safe to say, despite the fact that we're part of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, where, I mean, in any given year, the Chinese, they build the equivalent of Medupi, and here we're still battling to complete Medupi and Gusile. And we are not even utilizing our own relationships within BRICS, whether it's Russia and China, including even Brazil. The other part is that we only have one nuclear power in Quebec, in this country. And again, we need then to track and trace the skills that either we've lost in terms of the nuclear capacity as a country, because we have stopped sending people to France, because that nuclear, it was built by the French. Now, part of this context, again, we need to understand that the Department of Energy, in different forms and shape, that what is called the bid windows, that deals with different energy mix. And some of those areas, like the car power ship, it was then challenged, and that process, it went back and forth to courts, because my understanding, the car power ship, there was then supposed then to finalize the financial closures and then get approval from the environmental affairs, and then deal with that gap in terms of dealing with the shortage of the megawatt in the country. And again, because of the legal process of litigation, that process was then halted. So again, we need then to factor and then look at these things to say, where are we and why do we have all these problems at hand? The second part, again, we need then to look at for all the solar or the IPP office, including even bid windows, when they were issued, there was an outcry in terms of local content provisions, participation of the black emerging business people, and even the professionals within the energy space, to say, are we excluding them? Is this a conscious decision for us then to exclude them? To that extent, we then had a meeting with the Department of Trade and Industry to say, sure, we need then to look at a set aside for local content and designated products, so that we can then build industries locally. For that will include transfer of skills and knowledge. And then I think some of the issues, again, colleagues, is around the extent in which we've been told consistently that there is a sabotage at ESCOM, there is issues around corruption, and there are lots of other things. But in the main, the point again that we have raised in the public gallery is that corruption does not have any color. But in most cases, when you then follow the Zondo Commission, companies that were caught in the corrupt activity in ESCOM, particularly the white-owned companies and multinationals, they've paid fines and they continue doing business with ESCOM. There is nothing happening. They're not blacklisted. Contrary to that, you then have black companies that they were not caught in any corrupt, but they've been blacklisted and they're not doing business with ESCOM. So these are some of the issues that I'm saying. Within that political context, we need then to understand where we are and what is happening. Equally so, we need also then to factor the role of the climate change, the environment, because COP26 and COP27, that's where people then they start talking about just transition. And that just transition is where there is an amount of 8.5 billion US dollars that have been set aside to say you shut all your coal mines and then you resort to even your coal power stations, so that you then look at the independent power producers, the IPPs and the solars and the wind and so forth, so that, again, one of the critical areas that to date that have not been disclosed is the conditions for those loans and grants. to say what are the implications, what are those conditions that are attached to the monies that have been pledged by various countries. And again, in recent times, we've seen the Minister of Finance and the Secretary of Treasury from the US, I think yesterday or day before, where again, the question of dealing with energy is one of the critical areas that was addressed on just transition. And again, it then means American companies, in the main, they'll be the one that will benefit at the expense of local companies. Now, the underlying thing is that no single country globally that have ever industrialized using the IPPs or solar. I mean, industrialization is at the back of the coal power stations. Now, globally, South Africa, we are rich in coal. Now, we cannot just decide then to shut the coal mines and then rely on the sun and wind. And all these are conditional upon weather. If we don't have the sun, you're not going to have electricity. If we don't have wind, you're not going to have electricity. And globally, if we then talk about this, is scientific research. Any storage, battery storage on max, it gives you 5 hours, not more than that. It then means you will never then have electricity if it's raining for days. And we know this country, we can have a rain for a week. Now, these are some of the issues that colleagues, we need them to understand that context to say there are politics at play in terms of energy. There are issues around industrialization. There are issues around the impact on various communities where for many years, black townships and rural areas, they didn't have any electricity. Now, on the verge of thinking that now we are now at least moving towards civilization where we then see the light. Now we then have load shedding. Now we then privatize. And part of privatization, it then attacks what I call cross-subsidization, because in the main, you then have the rural and the rural communities and townships, they benefit in terms of a lesser tariff being paid because of cross-subsidization. Now, when you then privatize, automatically you deal with that. And in certain sectors or services, that will be defined as universal service, not access. These are two different things. Now, some of the areas in this country, they've been built at the back of mining houses or mining towns. And if, again, you then close and shut down the mines, you close the coal power stations in the neighborhood, there are lots of residential or communities. It then means they're going to become the white elephant, because these are some of the issues that they need them to be addressed. We need them to configure that. It's not only about the commercial aspects. We need also then to look at the social aspects of just transition to say, what does that mean for us as a country? And how then do we configure and deal with issues on the energy security? The last 2 points that, colleagues, I want to raise is, again, the point that some of you might think that we are not dealing with the health of our people, because government hospitals and clinics, some of them, including even residential, they're dependent on, they have a life support that is dependent on electricity. Now, if we don't have that, again, to date, we have not done any impact assessment to say, to what extent does this thing affect people that they rely on the support based on electricity. Again, we've seen in recent times where the funeral parlors, they're raising issues around the refrigerators and all these things. We've seen various sectors that are affected, whether it can be the farmers, they're also affected. You then look at the engineering, the restaurants, everybody's then affected. The difference here is the impact that it affects us is not the same, but it cut across that load shedding and blackouts, it affects all of us in different forms and shape. Now imagine if you have a fridge, you don't have electricity for a day, it then means, or even 2 days or 3 days or a week in certain areas, it then means whatever food that you have bought, you need then to throw it away. And you're not going to get anything. So these are some of the issues that we need then to look at. Now, my parting point, colleagues, is that we have arranged this meeting because we had an engagement last year, July, with the presidency and the team. And in their team, from the president's side, they didn't even have one single engineer that understands the configuration of energy. We presented a proposal from our side, and I think in the entire business community, we're the only one in Black Business Council where we had engineers that they can talk with authority, understanding the issues at hand. And that's the reason why the meeting that took place last year, July, it then culminated in various proposals for consideration. Some of those proposals were not even considered by government, not all of them, not even implemented. We had a meeting last week with the presidency and the team from ESCOM, the team from the interministerial, I think they call it National Energy Crisis Committee. Also, I think we had, from their side, they have, I call it a half a researcher, not even an engineer. And we had an engineer from our side. And it's not even an RPL electrical engineer, because some people, they will say we have the RPL recognition for prior learning engineers. No, these are competent, qualified people with a track record of building and running institutions, especially ESCOM. And other related areas. And I think, colleagues, that is the context in which we have arranged this Indaba, so that we need then to, and this is not a complaining session that we're going to have today. We are going to have a discussion, a robust debate and discussions that is geared towards providing solutions to the current problem, so that in our engagement with government and various entities, we then provide solutions. And communities out there, they're waiting for us. The other thing that we have done also, we have engaged even other grouping that they're taking this matter to court in terms of challenging the 32-point-something% of NERSA. So we are in touch with that grouping because they're taking a litigation route. We're also then talking to them. We are also then talking to other formations, so that we need then to have alignment and complementarity and collaboration in terms of the energy issues. And that is the reason why we are having these discussions today. And hence, I think, again, thanks to all the presenters for allowing and accepting the invitation to be part of this journey in our deliberation. And post today's discussions, what we'll basically then do, as an organization, we will issue a statement to the effect that we'll then provide solutions or direction in terms of energy. We'll also then prepare an engagement with the National Energy Crisis from the presidency, including even other organizations, so that we then map a clear roadmap in terms of energy. And I thank you again, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. And once more, thank you to the speakers. All the speakers are here. We've got Mr. Tabang Otat from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. He's the Chief Director there. We've got Jacob Maroga, Mr. Jacob Maroga, I'm sure you all know him. He used to run ESCOM before load shedding. We've got Miss Lungile Mashele, and who's an energy economist. We've got Miss Rusembuleshe, who's the managing director, and Dr. Mate is going to join us later. So we, as the president said, we have long passed the period when there's a load shedding, we're saying we're shocked. Remember, every time there's a load shedding, the president will cancel an international engagement, and 2 weeks after that, we still have load shedding. And then last time he left the United Kingdom, came to South Africa and had a Zoom meeting about electricity. So you wonder, why didn't he have that Zoom meeting wherever he was? Because you don't have to be in a physical location. Yeah, but people are not here to listen to me. They are coming to listen to qualified people. The first speaker is Ms. Thabang Odat. We're not reading the CVs. We're just here to listen to you because we've got confidence in you. The stage is yours.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Program Director. My name is Thabang Odet. I have been asked to come share some insights from government perspective, more specifically from the DMR point of view in terms of our mandate. So I have tried to cover as much as possible in my presentation, starting with the current structure that has been established by the President. But I also want to go into a little bit more of a technical details and give some insights as to what our thinking is. How do we get out of this mess? So if one looks at data, just for the first 10 months of first 10 months of 2021, and looking at 10 months of 2022, you will see a very worrisome trend. And that trend is we are shedding more energy, so we are not able to meet the demand. 2021, we had 2 terawatt hours of energy that we could not serve. 2022, we had almost twice the amount. So the long story is that the situation is getting worse. So we are not improving, we are reclining. When we developed the IRP in 2019, which is a policy document essentially approved by Cabinet, which outlines the types of generation technology that we are going to be procuring, we made an assumption that we assumed that Eskom's plant performance will be at 75%. That's the assumption we made. In essence, the production output from the overall fleet generation, we assumed a 75% production output. The reality was something completely different, and it's getting worse, right? So you have 2 issues. Firstly, you have the economy not growing as much as we had assumed. Secondly, and more worrying, is that Eskom's current fleet is not being maintained as it should. And as a result, you are not able to meet your demand-supply balance. We have initiated a number of interventions from government side of view, but these are focused more on new generation, right? How do we bring new capacity on board, and how quickly can we do that? Knowing government bureaucracy, we had to change certain rules and legislation in order for us to accelerate new generation capacity. However, even if you have all the approvals in place, your construction period for any new plant, you're looking at minimum 18 months, like 18 months to 2 years. So obviously that is long. It's more medium term. So the solution from new generation options is not something that will get us out of the problem that we currently have. So we needed a plan B to deal with the immediate crisis. So given the fact that we needed urgent solutions, new generation capacity, yes, well and good, but it takes long to construct. So the president then formed what was referred to as NECOM. It's a National Energy Crisis Committee, and is chaired by the president. And I'll show you the structure of that committee. So we provide technical support to that structure. So it's a political structure. NECOM comprises of certain ministers. Underneath that structure, there's a technical support, which is called Energy Net Joint. And this structure is chaired by the DG in the presidency. In terms of which departments are involved, so the chair, as I've said, is the Director General in the presidency. And there's a number of relevant departments that provides technical support to NECOM. We have also invited the regulator, but as an observer, because the regulator will still have to exercise its independence when they make decisions on whatever applications gets to them. We have SALGA, we have AMEU, the municipalities, and of course we have the main guest being ESCOM. So there's a secretariat support. Maybe the important point for this meeting is the layer that is outside of government, which we call additional capacity, has been mobilized, and I believe engagements with people outside of government also enhances the options that we look at. So there's certain external experts that we are also borrowing from, project managers, legal experts, and policy experts, energy policy experts. Maybe one more important point to mention is that we also have what is called National Joint Operations on Intelligence. And this is to deal with the, allegations, I will call it, until people are taken through the legal processes and they are charged and the cases are opened. There is a focus also to understand what is happening at the power station level. Right? When you transport coal from point A to point B, is it real coal or is it coal on top and something else underneath? Inside the power stations, are we doing the real maintenance or are there other things that are being done in there? So there is that focus also by the intelligence to see exactly what is happening at the power station level. So this is the technical structure that supports the political NECOM structure. There are 9 work streams that we have been grouped into, and these work streams, so all the people that I've mentioned form part of these work streams. So now I want to get into what the department's mandate is and what our thinking is around the solutions. So important point, we develop in the main 2 main things, legislation and policy. So the department, and it's not only on electricity, on all energy carriers. Right? The third point, specific to electricity, we also implement the energy security mandate. So the minister has the powers to initiate new generation capacity, relying on Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act. Right? And this is specifically around procurement. So the new generation that I spoke of at the beginning, the minister has the powers to initiate it. So we do the procurement, but another entity does the buying, and those are 2 different things. And there's a little bit of a confusion as to, when there are delays in bringing new generation capacity, where are the delays? But it's important to understand the full value chain. One part is procurement, which the minister initiates. The other part is procurement, which ESCOM, through its board, is expected to exercise. There has been delays in ESCOM exercising those powers for various reasons, which I don't want to get to today. Maybe the important point to mention is that the department is not responsible for plant maintenance. plant performance or financial performance of the licensed entity. We see ESCOM as one of the entities that are licensed through the regulator process. A regulator relies on legislation developed by the minister and the policy. But the legislation and the policies are not developed for ESCOM. We develop legislation for the industry and policies. And the regulator will then, based on those, license all the entities. One big player, obviously, is ESCOM. So there is a confusion that because ESCOM is not performing well in terms of plant performance and financial performance, there should be some changes in the department to assist ESCOM. That's a wrong view. So the problem starts with the board and it goes to the executive. If that fails, it goes to the shareholder department, which we all know who that is. If there's a need to change any policy or legislation, then the department gets involved. But of course, under the current NICOM arrangements coordinated by the president, we all play a role in trying to get us out of this mess. So what are the actions that we are proposing? So I've spoken a lot of background, just trying to set the scene. So in our view, there are 5 options that we are proposing. And we believe if all of these are implemented, perhaps except for for action 4, if all of these other ones are implemented, there's a potential of up to 11,000 megawatts. Right? So that immediately will get us out of stage 6 load shedding and save us further stages. So the first one, the next slide I will go into a little bit more details, is around focusing on the plant maintenance. So there is a program that is being run by ESCOM. It's called rehabilitation maintenance, but obviously it's not effective because it's not yielding results. We need to look deeper into that and see what is not being done correctly. As I've said, we have an energy availability factor of just under 50%. Right? And if we do proper maintenance, we are able to improve that EAF, probably not back to 75%, but it will be significantly higher than just under 50%. We believe there's about 6,000 megawatts that we can get from the existing fleets if we do proper maintenance. The second point, which will also yield immediate results, is around the emergency procurement program that the minister launched almost 2 years ago. And this is where the car power ship story is embedded. So it's not only car power, there's car power, which is the 3 sites, but there's also another project which it's not been spoken of. It's also a gas to power project, and this is the Total Mulilo project. So we believe all 4 projects, including car power, needs to be unlocked as a matter of agency. We believe there's value for money in getting the project to supply the grid. The period, whether we do 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, is a conversation that we need to have. But there is value for money to unlock this 1,500 megawatts because this could save us 1.5 stage of load shedding. Third is the cross-border. There are discussions with our neighboring countries to get additional capacity through those existing interconnectors. Of course, there is a little bit of a complex issue as to how much do we want to rely on the neighbors so that we still retain our energy sovereignty. I will come back to number 4. The last one, which is work in progress, we believe we can get up to 3,000 megawatts if we design a procurement program, with a simple condition that we are looking for base load, mid-merit. We'll categorize them, those 2 categories. The condition is that you must be able to finish construction within a period of 6 to 12 months. So you must connect to the grid within a 6 to 12 months because there's a specific reason why we want that. It's an emergency. The 4th point there, it's related to the first one that I've raised. One of the reasons that are being put forward why we are not doing proper maintenance is that there has been an exodus of skills, especially engineering skills, from ESCOM to other players. Right? And we believe that an approach that involves original equipment manufacturers, because all these plants, they were installed based on some design principles from OEMs. So we believe contracting OEMs and giving them tight mandate. So if we say to I won't call them by name, any OEM, you have 6 months to improve the load factor of this specific power station from 48% to say 60%. It's a contract, they only get paid on performance. Right? And parallel to that, you train our engineers, our new engineers within ESCOM. So we believe these 5 actions will or could yield almost 11,000 megawatts immediate in the 6 to 12 months period. Right? So this is the first point that I want to send the message across, that although we are talking about other things, we're talking renewable energy, we're talking just energy transition, we're talking all those nice things, but we are dealing with an emergency and we need to be focused. We need to get ourselves out of this mess before we can say, right, what are the other things to make sure that we don't come back to the situation. Now, getting a little bit deeper into the maintenance problems within ESCOM. So ESCOM indicates that, there are a number of, there's about 6 power stations that if we focus on them, right, let's forget the rest. If we focus on these 6 power stations, we are likely to get maximum value. If we get those OEMs, we say to them, here are the 6 power stations, please go do the proper maintenance, get them, the EAF to improve. We are likely to get a high capacity out of that. The problems that are being experienced at each power station, I'll just mention the top 4. Right? You have boilers, boiler tube leaks, turbines, a drought plant, and some generators failing. Right? So these are the big top 4. So if we can get an original equipment manufacturer that specializes on these 4 areas, we are able to at least start solving the problem. Right? So this is the level of detail that we need to go to. And this, we believe, will get us to get our plants performing better and therefore yield capacity into the grid and get us out of the load shedding mess that we are in. Now, so that's the immediate actions that we can take. Now, in the medium to long term, we have what we call an integrated resource plan, which was approved in 2019. We term it IRP 2019. What it says, it's a policy document. What it says is, as a country, we are going to be procuring certain technologies between 2019 and 2030. Those technologies on the electricity generation side. Right? So it's a mix of technologies. There's solar, there's wind, gas, there's hydro, there's extension of Kuber, the nuclear plant in the Western Cape, there's battery. So all of these are the technologies that government has stated in 2019, that this is what we're going to be procuring. The problem comes with implementation, right? And I'm emphasizing that this policy must be implemented. It won't get us out of the mess. We've been very slow on implementation, precisely because there are at least 2 parties. There's the department, there's ESCOM, that the 2 must work together to implement IRP. But if we decide that we're putting all those aside tomorrow and we're starting to sign off on whatever needs to be signed, there is still a construction phase that will come. So the solution is not to solve immediate problems, but this is more medium to long term. So if we implement this, we believe that in the future, in the medium term, we can be able to manage our supply-demand imbalance. We are currently revising this policy document. The work started last year around June, and we have invited a number of stakeholders. The idea is that we will, and we did engage the executives of BBC when they met with the minister, that at some point we will invite, once we start to get inside the technical nuances, we will invite and have those conversations. But there's a peer review technical structure comprising of experts, right? So we have local experts, we have international experts, just to look at the principle and the approach. But once we start producing reports, we will obviously engage other local organizations, especially on the business side of things. So now what happens between now, 2023, and 2030? What do we need to procure? I mean, this is based on the IRP, the existing policy, that I'm emphasizing that it must be implemented for us not to go back to the mess that we are in. So the first issue is the 3,000 megawatts gas to power. The work has started already. Transaction advisors have been appointed. We are currently designing the request for proposal, your tendering document. Our plan is to issue it before end of March. I hope the team will still make the timeline, but this was our original plan. Before end of March, we will release the RFP for 3,000 megawatts gas to power in accordance with the IRP 2019. The second point is the 2,500 nuclear power. This is a new nuclear power station, so it doesn't exist yet. It's not Kuber. The reason why you won't see it in the IRP 2019, we have a hydro-powered program, which the understanding at that time was that we're going to import that from Grand Inga in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There has been some delays because procurement, DRC is a sovereign state, so procurement happens in that country and they lead the procurement process. The intention was once they have procured, we will enter into discussions with the procured developer so that we can agree on certain key deliverables and the price and tariff. We are concerned about that hydro project, although it's due in 2030, we are concerned that it may expose us to risks. So we don't want to wait until 2028, 29, and only at that time make a decision. So in the current IRP, there is a provision that should there be any risk that needs to be adjusted, we will start the nuclear program because it's a no regret approach. Right? So at some point, we will take the nuclear proposal to cabinet, and once it's passed cabinet, then we would have made a firm decision that we are abandoning the hydro, we are replacing it with nuclear. The third one, also nuclear, and I'm sure the chair will be excited because I had the concerns around nuclear and the fact that we are losing skilled people there. So the current nuclear power station in the Western Cape, it's due to reach its end of life. It's due to reach its original end of life. It was designed for 40 years. However, there is an option to extend the lifespan. We have exercised that option. We believe we can still get 20 more years out of Quebec power stations. And also, number two, retain the nameplate detail to the original 1,926. That's why you don't see the 1,800 that we are all aware of. Work is underway. ESCOM has started what they call a lifetime extension. There are issues, but the regulator, the nuclear regulator and ESCOM are sorting out those issues. So that's also in the IRP 2019. The last point is around the solar photovoltaic as well as wind turbines. 14,000 megawatts has been allocated for these technologies combined. And so because it's an energy mix, we're not favoring one technology over the other. But when one engages with the general populace, you may get a sense that we don't have sufficient renewable energy in IRP 2019, but the numbers and the facts speak different. So we believe that between now and 2030, we need to implement these four as a matter of agency. They will yield the results in 18 months, 24 months time. They won't yield the results immediately, but we need to start the work now. So my last two slides is around the IRP review. We have started, as I've said. So phase one is complete. Phase two, 80% done. We are about to, while we do the last 20% of phase two, we are about to start phase three. Once this document is published, it will replace the old energy mix table that we are all familiar with. How we deal with projects that will not be operational at the time when the new IRP is updated. We take a view that once a program has reached procurement stage, we cannot cancel it. So we'll take it into consideration in the review of IRP. But anything else that has not started a procurement, obviously we review that program. What will be different this time around, and I want to, this is my last slide, so maybe I can spend a bit more time on this. We will produce the energy mix document, right? So that's the table that you see there at the back. But what we want to do with this table, before we approach cabinet, before we make it a final policy document, we want to do additional studies. And I'll explain why we want to do those studies. So you have a limit as to which technology should be allowed to penetrate our national grid without affecting the grid adversely. In the past, we never did that test because we were introducing new technologies. But now you are reaching a stage where you need to recognize that you cannot have more than a certain amount of solar PV connected to the national grid, for simple reason that the national grid has what we call a national control center, and they need certain instruments from different technologies. So the control center wants to rely on a number of technologies, right? And if you technology, you find that it's not easy to control the grid, right? So when the sun is not shining in other parts of the world, you need additional generator to ramp up very quickly so that you still balance the supply demand. So we are proposing that we need to do those analysis as to how much of these technologies can the grid absorb before we finalize the energy mix for the country. There's another issue around our COP27 commitments, and I'll talk to that in my concluding slide. What we think should be done, because there's quite a lot of lobbying on technology basis, right? So you get coal lobbyists, nuclear lobbyists, PV, wind, so all of them, they're advocating that no, our technology must dominate South Africa's energy mix. We believe the energy mix must be informed by what the grid can accept. Because if you put a policy document that is not acceptable to the grid, you are not going to be able to implement it. Right? The COP17, maybe in my last point, and we had discussions with colleagues from presidency, that normally when the total number is allocated for the country, well, we made a commitment. That number is then split into different sectors. So energy sector will get its own allocations, transport sector its own allocation. For energy sector, we don't believe that that number is achievable, the 27 number, technically. So when one looks at what the grid can absorb, we don't believe that number is achievable based on the technologies that we know. Right? And that's the discussion we need to conclude. We have started with colleagues in the presidency. We need to conclude those discussions and possibly revise the number downwards. Because there was no technical analysis done on the grid, from the grid perspective, before we went to COP27. We did raise the issue, I'm not raising it for the first time, in closed sessions, but you know how things sometimes unfold. But now we are dealing with reality. So the engineers are saying, no, not possible, let's rethink a different approach. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Thabang. And maybe let me just talk about the program. We had thought we'll maybe have Mr. Maruga. After Mr. Maruga will have a tea, but I think we'll just run through the program, and then we will have the questions and answers session at the end, in the interest of time. So. If you've got comments, questions, I see people online have already asked several questions. I think Mercedes Sisipo, if you can coordinate those questions so that the speakers can answer them. We will then go through the program, and then at the end we'll have questions and answers. So the next speaker is Mr. Jacob Maroga. Mr. Maroga, the stage is yours. What the charger?
My battery is weak, but yeah. Let me share. I just need to figure out how to share my screen here. Just see. How do I share my screen here? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'll go for it. Great. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. President. Thanks, the Chief Executive. Particular thanks to Tabang. Tabang, thanks very much, because when I look at your presentation from the other presentations that we've already seen, I think your presentation is beginning to migrate to the engineering questions. So thanks very much. So what I'm going to presenting, I'm presenting on behalf of the BBC, so it's not my views, it's the views of the BBC. Some of them I agree with, some of them, of course, I'm neutral, given the fact that I've been advising the BBC. So we start with the July 2022 Presidential Energy Action Plan. As the BBC were asked to give input to the plan, we're invited by the presidency, firstly, for them to present their plan. But after that, we also submitted our own submissions to the plan for consideration. As the president have said, some of the issues were not actually taken into that plan. We'll talk about those. But in July 2022, these are the 5 key things that the presidency presented as the action plan to deal with the energy crisis. The first one, it's 5 of them. The first one is fix Eskom and improve the availability. The second is to enable and accelerate private investment in generation capacity in South Africa. Third is to accelerate procurement of new capacity for renewables, gas, and battery storage. Fourth is to unleash businesses and households to invest in rooftop solar. And then 5, to fundamentally transform the electricity sector in South Africa. Thank you. Thank you very much. So our response as the BBC, we said, firstly, from what the presidency have defined as a problem, let's define it for ourselves, because the recommendations that we put forward are based on what we believe is a problem statement. What is a problem statement in South Africa is that we've got a base load crisis, which is caused by the poor performance of the coal fleet of Eskom. Because it's important as a point of departure to say whatever solutions we bring forth to end the crisis should depart from a common problem statement. So as a response, we actually presented an 8-page document into the presidency outlining some of our recommendations, which I'll summarize now, and then go into the other issues. On fixing of Eskom, we said, yes, we fully support, because that is the most important, significant step to get out of load shedding. Because the biggest issue now is the performance of Eskom, and in solving the problem, you have to focus on the biggest problem, which is the coal fleet. So we said, totally agree, totally support. We believe that's the thing that needs to be focused on. And opening floodgates for private sector investment, particularly for renewable. We said we support. We said we support the diversity of mixed generation in South Africa. However, we make the point that if it's renewable and non-dispatchable, it's not going to solve the current problem. And I think that's where you're beginning to see alignment, as I've said with Thabang. There's alignment now in terms of what are the engineering issues as we talk to the generation solutions. So we said support the mix, but it's not going to solve the current problem. Accelerate procurement of new capacity from renewable gas and storage. It's a similar comment. If the additional capacity is what is called dispatchable, in other words, I mean, we can use the word baseload, but the generic word is dispatchable. Dispatchable meaning the national control of Eskom is in control in terms of switching on, switching off, ramping up, ramping down. That's dispatchable. Those are the solutions we support. And in this mix, yes, gas and battery storage give you dispatchability. And if the solutions are focused on that, we welcome them because they are going to assist in solving the problem. And we noted in our document that, but however, when you look at the procurement that is already out there, there is the risk mitigation procurement, which Powership is one of the controversial ones. But the whole procurement was based on looking for dispatchable power to be able to allow space within the Eskom system to do maintenance, because you need dispatchable power to be able to switch off current power stations to do maintenance. So, but we say we are not seeing much. I mean, as we see it now, there's probably only about 500 megawatts of dispatchable battery storage that's in the system of procurement. So that's not enough, clearly. Then unleash business and households for rooftop solar. We support the rooftop solar for business and domestic, but again, it's a demand-side management. It will help reduce the load, but it's not going to necessarily stop load shedding. It's important to say that. The fifth was fundamentally transform the electricity sector. Our comment to that was to say, yes, we hear you, but the plan you are providing as the presidency in terms of the transformation of the sector doesn't seem to be coherent and also comprehensive. The focus there has always been the separation of the transmission company out of Eskom, but the rest of the discussion is not there. For instance, we know distribution is in crisis, but there's nothing about distribution. A few years ago, there was a plan to consolidate the distribution sector into 6 entities, but that collapsed. So in the transformation of electricity sector, things like distributions are not mentioned. I think additionally, we said a number of things also to the presidency, beyond just commenting on the 5 solutions. For instance, we talked about lessons from Europe, the fact that now we can see some of the issues that are emerging out of the European energy crisis, particularly the issues of renewable versus fossil, in terms of efficacy on the grid, the issues of market design. I mean, one of the things that we've seen in the European crisis was, prices skyrocketing 1,000% because of the market design. And those are lessons that when you come to South Africa, we need to be talking about. And the other thing we talked about is that COP26, we had this plan where the rich countries were going to pay South Africa to move away from coal. And we asked the question, some of those countries are going through a massive energy crisis. Can we still rely on them to support us in our transition, right? They are spending billions to support their own businesses who are going through crisis. Will they have the capacity to support us in our transition? Some of them are going back to coal. So we just needed to ask that question. So in January, on the 16th of January, then we were again invited to an emergency presidential briefing. As the president said, it was as a result of the current load shedding. The president didn't go to Davos because of it. So the action plan was, we got an update on the action plan of July 2022. There was a presentation from ESCOM, from the presidency, from NICOM, and there was a joint presentation by BUSA, BLSA, Energy Council, and the Mineral Council. We didn't make a presentation, and part of this is to allow ourselves to have a comprehensive response to the presidency on the latest power crisis and the power plan. Just as a summary, just to indicate as we go into the solutions, to talk about current situation in terms of consumption. The consumption of electricity, or the demand of electricity, has been declining since 2010. I think it's important to say that. The demand has been declining since 2010. So both energy consumption and peak demand have been declining. It's important as a backdrop as we move into the next discussion. But what we note very, very clearly is that the energy availability factor of the coal fleet, as Thabang has already alluded, has moved from, in 2018, from about 78%, is now hovering below 50. And the figure for last year was 59%. But as we speak now, on a month-to-month basis, is hovering under 50%, which is a big crisis, that half of your fleet is not available to support you. And this is the reason we're in this crisis. And when you look at nominal capacity, this is the CSIR figures. We are over 54,000 in terms of capacity, including renewables and the additions from ESCOM. Now, this is just showing the days of load shedding in the past 12 months. But what is particularly concerning is that after July, after the action plan, the wheels came off. It's almost like from September, we had daily load shedding right through. I mean, the only reprieve, I think, was on Christmas Day. So I think that's really the biggest issue. And this is published by one of the websites that deals with load shedding applications. For 2022, those are the hours. 157 days in terms of hours. But when you just count days where there's load shedding, last year it's been 200 days in terms of load shedding in South Africa. Now, this is the roadmap called the roadmap for the Energy Action Plan. I call it the arithmetic of megawatts. Why do I call it the arithmetic of megawatts? One of the problems with this plan is that it mixes up all megawatts irrespective of technologies. And if you're not looking this thing from a system operations perspective, every megawatt is equal to every megawatt. But when you look at it from a system perspective, as Thabang has actually eloquently alluded, is that each technology gives different levers to the system operator. And let me just elaborate on that. The system operator is like a pilot of the grid. They sit in Simapan. On a 24-hour, minute-by-minute, second by second, they're looking at the grid, and the frequency is almost like the flight plan. You must stick to 50 hertz all the time. And any deviation above or below, you have to pull levers to keep it at 50 hertz. So the reason we do load shedding, there will be more demand than supply, then the frequency begin to dip. Now, the system operator needs to lever to push up power. If there's no power, then it drops supply. That's why we do load shedding. Right? But let me also talk to the issue of the blackout. Right? So load shedding is the first lever. It's manual load shedding. But within the system, there are things called automatic low-frequency load shedding. That is, if the system operator is run out of levers and this frequency is still going down, there will be automatic load shedding to prevent a blackout. So there are still many layers before we can get to a blackout. And I've actually stood up and said, look, from the experience of operator, I've got confidence that we won't see a total blackout easily because of their competency. And even before, as they do load shedding, there are many other layers to make sure we don't go there. But of course, as we go to stage 6 load shedding, theoretically, we are much more at risk. But I just don't think we should be concerned about it, but we should not worry that they will let things lead to a blackout, which I hope we'll never get to. Now, coming to general observation, that will take us to the position of the BBC, which we'll discuss. Firstly, to say the crisis has worsened since July, right? And what is even concerning is that it worsened even during the holidays, which is traditionally a low-demand season. That's worrying. I mean, having stage 6 in December and January is actually worrying, which means this year is going to be quite difficult. I mean, even now, I don't think everybody is back fully at work. Now, as we go into February, things are going to get tough. We are not seeing a turnaround of the energy availability factor at Eskom. We're seeing a rapid downturn. I think that's something that I think is concerning. Thirdly, we're seeing the focus on private sector renewable projects. It's been made that there are about 9,000 megawatts of private sector power projects that is coming into the grid, and they talk about the pipeline. Now, let me just explain what, in terms of maybe here, just talk about categories of capacity, and I think just following on Thabang. The first priority of capacity is what is installed, is online, but is not performing well, because that is a quicker turnaround. So that should be category number 1, fixing what is broken in terms of installed capacity. The second is bringing in dispatchable capacity. The car power ship program, whether it's car power ship, but that program of targeting dispatchable power, meaning power that Eskom has got control over, and if they want to take off a plant, they've got confidence that they've got standby to take off that plant, dispatchable power. That's the second category. The third category, it's the utility scale renewable, right? Now, the utility scale renewable is not going to give you dispatchability, it's not going to give you capacity, it's going to give you energy. It's not going to solve the current problem completely. It helps somewhat if you've got energy in the system. For instance, you may not use your diesel more intensely, you may not use your hydro pump storage more intensely, so it will actually save you on what you call emergency levers, right? And the fourth category is what is called embedded generation. Embedded generation, that's what you put on this roof, on any other roof, but the system operator doesn't see that. The system operator will only see a reduction in demand, right? You don't see that this roof has got solar, because that is not visible to the system operator. Yes, it's good, but it's not what we should prioritize now. Those first two we should prioritize: fixing Eskom and looking at dispatchable emergency power. Number 4, and I think it's important to talk to this, that from the BB's perspective, that there seems to be an abandonment of Eskom by stealth, right? It's not straightforward. It's almost like, Eskom is a problem, we will tolerate it to an extent, we do, and we see this through the demonizing of Eskom, corrupt, polluting, riddled with saboteurs. Now, I think it's important to say that, but it's important to say we need to be careful. And we'll come to that when we talk about the solutions going forward. Because demonizing what you have when you don't have any other option, I don't think is a good thing. Forcing the green agenda on South Africa, somehow we believe that the green lobby has hijacked the crisis and wanting to force more renewable on the grid using the crisis. Yes, we welcome green. Yes, we welcome diversity. But we shouldn't use the crisis to force a solution which, in my view, is inappropriate technically. Many centers of power on energy security. We have seen public differences between certain centers in government. I think we've seen the ruling party trying to resolve that in terms of reallocating portfolios in terms of state-owned enterprises, and we hope that will assist so that at the public level we don't see incoherence. And I'm glad to see what Thabang has been presenting, that there's coherence, especially around the issues of base load and non-dispatchable. Of course, we've got a vacuum of leadership in departed. The COO is departing almost at the same time. We have not seen a coherent plan in terms of how that's going to be dealt with. For a critical state-owned enterprise like this, I think what you need is clarity from the shareholder in terms of dealing with this vacuum. Erosion of the state role in terms of energy security. Now, yes, private sector investment in the energy sector is important. But what you cannot remove is the role of the state in energy security. Even in countries where you have privatized the electricity supply, right? You cannot privatize energy security. So I'm going to give an example. In Germany, when the gas crisis hit, their biggest gas power, which is private, almost went into liquidation. But the German government had to actually fork out billions of euros to bail it out, because if it collapses, the entire energy system collapses. So you cannot privatize energy security. And when the country's in trouble, it falls back to the state. So here we're seeing, for instance, the issue of saying we no longer have a cap. Anybody can build anything, anywhere, no licensing. It's fine. But the question is, if there isn't enough, who do you blame? Are you going to say, well, if there isn't enough, you can build yourself? You can't build an economy on the basis that anybody who wants to expand must build his own capacity. The state will still have to have the role to bring basic infrastructure, and energy is one of them. So the issue of the energy security is important. And I already talked about the roadmap is based on simplistic arithmetic of megawatts. I don't need to emphasize that point. I'm struggling to remove my. Okay. So, what are the draft positions of the BBC in resolving this crisis? I think we are recognizing now that I think the crisis is deepening, is impacting all walks of life in society, business, life in general. And we believe we've reached a stage where we need more powerful levers, and we believe declaring a state of disaster is one of those levers, because it will then allow for faster turnaround on some of the key remedial actions, as we've seen with COVID. That's the first thing that I think we want to put out there. Number two, strengthen and empower the ESCOM governance structures to manage the state of disaster conditions. If you go into state of disaster, you may have to review the governance of ESCOM and say, what must I do to strengthen it so that they may work through the state of disaster. Number three, redefine roles of regulatory structures. within the state of disaster for oversight. What do we mean? For instance, let's just give you an example. NESA has got the authority to increase prices, to decrease prices. But if we're in this state of disaster, we can't have a situation where Eskom and NESA are perennially fighting about what the tariff is. Right? And Eskom says, I don't have money to fix. Those things must be dealt with. And it must be clear what the line of march is in terms of the funding for Eskom. Treasury in terms of regulation for procurement. If you go into a state of disaster, you need to look at those. And the other risk that I think has not been properly quantified, and Eskom is aware of it. There are a number of power stations within Eskom that are not operating within the right environmental regulations. So they operate under exemptions. But if the Department of Environment decides that those exemptions are no longer valid, we can close a lot of capacity in South Africa. So those issues need to be clearly stated that the department will have to give us that, that exemption until we're out of this crisis. Number 4, affirm and assert the role of Eskom as a national champion. You cannot operate at the state as if you're tolerating Eskom. You need to affirm it as a national champion. And there are certain things that come from here. One of the BBC members raised this point that South Africa has got a nuclear fleet and has been having nuclear professionals over many, many years. But in the past few years, with Eskom's problems, many nuclear professionals have left Eskom. Most of them are in the Middle East. And if you don't affirm the championship of Eskom in nuclear, when you say we're going for the nuclear fleet, you may find that the skills are depleted. So it's important. But also, number 5, develop a clear roadmap for coal. We're talking about a just transition, and the immediate impression is almost like all coal stations are going to be closed tomorrow. All right? But if you give that indication to the entire coal ecosystem, you must understand what the consequence is. If I am a coal miner and I have to expand my shaft to supply to Eskom, but if Eskom tells me or can't give me certainty about longevity, then I'll just run that mine to failure. And the consequences is supply of coal will be depleted. So we need to be clear that we have a 20-year roadmap of coal, and in that 20-year, coal will remain part of our base load, and then all the investments that needs to be done must be done. Because if you don't give confidence to the ecosystem, not only to the Eskom power stations, but to the coal mine ecosystem that support Eskom, and the equipment maintenance companies that support Eskom. Because if you don't, they will demobilize. And when you say, let's have long shutdowns for Eskom, you may not have the skills to actually overhaul some of the fleet. So it's important confidence. Define the energy availability factor improvement plan. We know that the Eskom board is on this. We support that, and it's important that we give short, medium, and long-term targets for this. Define the role of the private sector in the energy availability factor improvement plan. The issue of OEMs is already there. But the other issue that I think we need to put on the table is private-public partnerships, where you may look at particular power stations and say, can we give it to a PPP to invest capital and skills and give us continuity of supply, and what are the frameworks to do that? That is important. Number 8, affirm and empower the role of the system operator as a key player in solving the energy crisis. As I've said, the system operator is the pilot. That's that's the institution that decides. Today we're going for load stage 6. Tomorrow, if the system operator is not at the center of the discussion, we run the risk that we've seen where people are excited by megawatts that may not necessarily assist the system operator, right? So they may be acquiring these megawatts. When they give to the system operator says, look, sorry, I will still do load shedding because these megawatts are not going to help me in system adequacy. And we're not seeing that in terms of the system operator being at the center. In fact, in system updates, what you would want to see is the actual system operator giving the system updates, because that's the person that pulls the plug and can tell you, what are the issues in the system. Number 9, industry funding strategy, which is clear and long-term, not this ad hoc. One day we run out of diesel and we run out of money. The second day we don't know whether we're having 18% or it's going to be something else. The third is government is saying we're going to take on the debt of ESCOM, but it doesn't happen. It is important for the industry to have a clear certainty around the funding strategy of the industry. Number 10, develop an electricity sector labor strategy that mobilizes employees. Now, colleagues, I think you run businesses here. If in the media, your company and your employees are demonized as it's happening now, but you are looking at them to say, please assist in solving the crisis. You are saying two things. You are not important, going to close down, and in fact you're corrupt, you're saboteurs, but at the same time, please assist in dealing with the biggest crisis in the country. You can't have both. We're going to have to be very clear to the employees in terms of mobilizing them and making them part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. The 11th point is we have seen that transmission grid capacity is becoming to be a constraint in expanding generation. So we're saying that's something that is also a need to be focused on. And I just need to emphasize the issue of transmission grid expansion. It may be the most difficult compared to generation capacity. You see, with generation capacity, you find land, and you say, you probably own the land as the developer, and you put your power station. With transmission, it's thousands of kilometers that you actually have to acquire, all right? And you have to negotiate with thousands of landowners, right? And I've seen this, when we did the expansion towards Lephalale. All you need to do is to hit a few farm owners, right? Who are going to tell you that we came to South Africa because we're here because it's prime land farm. And put these ugly things called transmission line on my farm. I don't care how much you want to pay me, I don't want that. Right? Now, when you have hundreds of those in some of the transmission corridors, that becomes a big problem. So the issue of transmission grid expansion is important. So colleagues, I think I'll stop there. These are the, I think this slide is really the main slide in terms of the, and I think the President, will facilitate in terms of additions to this, but this is what we want to take back. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think we just need to also, just to add, the BBC is proposing the state of disaster, not the state of emergency. Because people can easily confuse the two and say, we're proposing for a state of emergency. There are implications for when we have a state of emergency. What we're proposing is a state of disaster. And as I indicated, we're going to take all the speakers, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end. The next speaker is Ms. Lungile, who's the energy economics. A round of applause for her.
Thank you so much. My name is Lungile Mashele. As Hanki just said, I was actually expecting a panel, not to present in front, but anyway, here we are. So there's no presentation. Mine is simply just to run through a couple of points that have been mentioned by the previous speakers, perhaps highlight some of the challenges that we do see as well, and some of the solutions. So one of the things that Hanki just mentioned and was previously mentioned was the state of disaster. That's exactly where we find ourselves as a country. There is no coming out of this without collective effort, and this is exactly why we are here. Now, a state of disaster does not just go on its own. It needs to be coupled with emergency procurement. Let's look at what happened last year, Russia, Ukraine. Russia said, listen, this is our gas, we're going to keep our gas, and it's non-negotiable. That plunged Europe into a crisis. So you basically found Germany scrambling all over the world. German Chancellor was here, I think, if not twice, negotiating with South Africa to say, listen, you need to assist me. I need coal, I need hydrogen, I need a plan, and the key thing to remember, and I always say this to people, is that what drives other nations to move is because there is political will. In this country, we lack political will. We've been in this crisis for 16 years and counting, only because the ruling party knows that they will still get voted in next year. Perhaps this is the first time that they have a lever and they have a stick, as we've been experiencing load shedding every single day, that it's finally dawning on them that perhaps 2024 is not guaranteed. And this is why we're seeing a mad scramble of all the projects, all the plans, and we're hoping at least something comes to fruition, not for them, but for the country as a whole. In 2021, there was what we call the Risk Mitigation IPP program. This was supposed to address the 2,000 megawatts that Eskom required immediately to be able to run their maintenance. And initially it was 2,000 megawatts, and nobody questioned when the CEO moved it to 4,000 megawatts. Nobody raised an eyebrow again when he said, now I need 6,000 megawatts. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we're like, what is the exact number? What are we chasing? So with the risk mitigation IPP program, it was a number of technologies, but it was the dispatchable power we're talking about. And it included the car power ships. It also included some solar as well as battery and dispatchable, all of it. That capacity, none of it is yet to come onto the grid as yet. And the key thing there, or not even close to, I think there was only 1 or 2 projects that reached financial close. The car power ship still is going through public participation processes. And the key thing is that we said we had an emergency, but we have done nothing about that emergency. When Germany had their emergency, they went totalitarian almost immediately. And they said, we are going to procure LNG FSRUs. They did this in under a year. I think they started, it must have been like in about March of 2022, and in, I think 3 weeks ago, first gas, the LNG up and running, delivered, and they're sorted out. How did they do that? They said we are procuring in an emergency program, number one. Secondly, under an emergency program, we will not have long consultation periods. We're giving you 2 weeks public participation period. In this country, With the car power ships, for instance, that is a public participation process that started some 2 years ago. It's still ongoing even now, still waiting for ESCOM to finalize what their concerns are, still going through a legal process, environmental process. 2 years, more than 2 years later, nothing is online. That is some of the problems that we're facing in this country when we talk about emergencies. Then you look at, we then move past the emergency program and we want to then procure. We're facing a situation, as Tabang indicated, in the integrated resource plan, where we had 3 gigawatts of gas, 1.5 gigawatts of coal, we had 2.5 gigawatts nuclear. Everything was outlined, and this was already in discussions 2018, 2019 tabled. 2023, we need to procure. We're still waiting for the RFP, and we're hoping that the gas one will come out before the end of March. Again, it points to a crisis. We did speak earlier on about the various lobby groups that have infiltrated our energy planning as a country. But surely, we're a sovereign nation. We're a nation that has an integrated resource plan and want to execute on that resource plan. We publish it so that government is well aware of what has to happen, as well as civil society, business, everybody is on board, lenders, financiers, your engineers, lawyers, so that everybody knows what has to happen. Now, when that delays, or when that does not happen, plans that we have set in motion, it further delays energy planning. Now, why is this important? In the Integrated Resource Plan 2010, we said we want 9.6 gigawatts of nuclear. And we were going to build it incrementally, but more importantly is that it was going to be at a scale and a pace we can afford. If we had implemented that IRP the way it was, this year, 2023, 1.5 gigawatts of nuclear was supposed to be coming online. This year, 2023, 1.5 gigawatts of coal, this was Kanyisa as well as Tabamedzi, was supposed to be coming online. We would have had an additional 3,000 megawatts of firm capacity. And that is the problem with delaying decisions with regards to long-term energy planning. So even as we welcome a new, let's call it IRP 2023, we need to execute on the IRP 2019 as it was. It does look at various ways of diversifying the energy mix. Yes, we are inundated with, I wouldn't say requests, but all kinds of bullying that come in from the global north. And they say, you need to do, you need to do. Germany, despite all their solar use, they have a reserve margin in excess of 200%. What does this mean? They have, technically speaking, they have 200% more capacity than what they actually require. Then why were they scrambling all over Africa looking for solutions? Primarily because even they know that there are limitations to solar and to renewables, and this is why you need a diversified energy mix. In a recent conversation that I had, an energy dialogue, there was a gentleman from the German Chancellery who was invited, and the guy was very clear. And he said, we are pursuing energy security and we're pursuing a transition, but the transition does not supersede energy security. And he said that they came to South Africa to secure green hydrogen gas. Why? Because Russia has shut off their gas lines. And they were saying, we're still going to proceed and we're still going to pay. We just do not have the land that is required to process this green hydrogen. So we need South Africa to assist, we need Namibia to assist, and we need other countries perhaps around the world to assist. And South Africa was more than willing, and we said, absolutely, we will assist developing this green hydrogen plan. But it's also very important to realize that Germany is interconnected to other countries. So Germany does not necessarily risk total grid collapse. They've got Poland for coal. They've got France, nuclear. They have Norway that has gas. They've got hydro. Should anything happen to that grid, it will affect the entire region. So naturally, they will assist each other in whatever way they deem necessary. South Africa does not have that luxury. We are fully dependent on ourselves. Yes, every single morning we do buy about 1,000, I don't want to, 1,300, 500, about 1,500 odd megawatts from Kawarabasa. And I'm told now there's an additional 300 megawatts coming in from Mozambique as well. This is there, but certainly if you're running an economy of about 49,000 megawatts installed, that is a pittance. If we get into trouble as a country, we are literally on our own, in essence. And we always need to remember this when people come with all kinds of solutions and ideas to South Africa's problems. Then I want to go to, when we talk about long-term energy planning, one of the key things that we have perhaps let the region down on as South Africa, you've got Mozambique. Mozambique started their gas program, maybe let me take it back a bit. So exploration has always been a thing of Africa. Whatever resources. You've got your oil and gas in the West Coast, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Senegal, coming down to Angola. And more recently, there have been massive discoveries, even this week also, in Namibia. So clearly there is a pattern that has been established along the coast. We also go along the east coast. You've got Mozambique and their gas. You've got Namibia, you've got Tanzania and so forth. But for some reason, those countries are proceeding with their plans and their exploration activities, and they are monetizing that gas. In South Africa, for some or other reason, we're not doing anything of the sort. We're being held back by various lobby groups. We're being held back by people who are opposed to what we see as development. Now you have a situation where it looks like the gas stopped when it got to Namibia, and it stopped when it got to Mozambique. And South Africa basically has nothing. This is negating the fact that we have a whole Moss gas area in the Mossel Bay area. Yes, it is depleted now, but there was gas there. We've stopped exploration, and we are saying that we're going to import everything that we need. We are going to import Mozambican electricity that they have taken from their own gas and have powered. But now we don't want to explore, but we're going to buy their gas. Mozambique have been developing their gas fields from a long time ago with the Panditamani fields, which are almost depleted now, which Sasol has been buying from the cheapest gas in the world. We didn't even benefit from that. Then you go to northern where you've got your Rovuma Basin, etc., etc. South Africa, with the problems that we're experiencing, you would have thought we would have been Mozambique's first client. Let me tell you, this week, first shipment went out, Croatia. Everything is leaving. And we're sitting here in the dark, being dictated to what we can and cannot do. And for me, that is a gross miscalculation and misjudgment on our part. I don't even want to blame anybody else, on our part. So with this shipment gone to Croatia, they're now sorting out their energy crisis. They're deep in their winter. They are sure that they're not going to experience load shedding. Germany also came and did their bit. They know they're not going to experience load shedding, and they will be fine as well. And this is why I spoke about political will. Because in those countries, should they experience an hour, 2 hours, a day of load shedding, the very next day, the president of that country, accompanied by Treasury, accompanied by the Ministry of Energy, all those three people will have to resign on that day. We are being bullied in terms of what we can use in terms of coal. I'm glad Tabang, your presentation. In fact, I think this is the first time I'm getting a lot of confidence from DMRE, as Jacob said, from the technical point of view, that there are certain things that we cannot neglect. And for the longest time, it has felt like we're just going to go on a renewables lobby pathway, while the rest of us are well aware that there's a very big difference between what is available at 12 midday, like now, versus what is available at 7 p.m. Top 5 coal nations, you've got China, USA, India, Japan, and South Africa. Out of all these countries, we're the only ones getting bullied to reduce our reliance on coal. Everybody else is expanding, is doing what they have to do. If you must know, the US, who have been very heavy-handed in terms of what has to happen in South Africa, their energy mix, 6% hydro, 19% nuclear, 38% natural gas, 22% coal, 9% wind, and 6% is termed other, which can include solar and biomass and a number of different things. South Africa, who do we export our coal to? We export it to India. If you recall, India at COP said we're not interested in any of this. We will proceed on our own energy path, and that's it. We will not be deterred on this path. We export our coal to the EU as a whole. In the last, since 2022, 2021, our export of coal were 1 million tons to the EU bloc. 2022, it was 10 million tons is what we exported to the EU. So trust me, when they are in a crisis, they know exactly what they have to do. And this is why I'm calling on us also, in the middle of our crisis, let us also be decisive. And I'm glad that the BBC has been very vocal. I mean, I tell Hanki this all the time, and I'm like, you guys are very vocal and you're very loud, and you're almost antagonizing. But that's a good thing, because government needs to understand you're not dealing with fools. You're dealing with people who have businesses, who have entities, corporates, people who want to grow an entire economy. And it's not going to happen on the back of intermittent resources. And perhaps just in closing, what I will say is that our solution to Eskom is not as complicated, and the slides that have been shown prove that. If you improve your energy availability factor by just 10%, so we can disagree on the number. For argument's sake, let's call it 50% EAF. If you improve just by 10%, that is 4 stages of load shedding gone. If you look at our EAF from 2021, let's say about June, to where it is currently, that looks very deliberate. It looks like a deliberate attempt to finish us off. If we only improve it by 10%, just 5,000 megawatts, that is 4 stages at least of load shedding that we will not experience. This is basically 3 units, Usile, and the various plants that need to be worked on. It's really not a tragic story. It can be implemented, but it needs political will. It also needs will from proper leadership at Eskom. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, what do I say after that? Thank you, Lungile. I'm very impressed, and I totally agree with Dr. Jacob in terms of what you've outlined as the solutions that we should come up with. So I won't try to go back into that because I'll be wasting your time. So I'll just have 1 or 2 key points that I will emphasize without repeating what has been said. Firstly, as an introduction, I would like to re-emphasize that security of supply of electricity in South Africa is an imperative. And this has been said through the Energy Policy White Paper in 1998 already. And that, I think, we are not taking that seriously. Security of supply means that South Africa's competitiveness is important. Competitiveness in terms of industries, in terms of commercial entities, is critical. It's important for our socio-economic development. I think that there's, actually I shouldn't even get into that because I think we all know the impact of not having security of supply issues. This is why I believe that our priority, there are many things that are facing us, as you could see. Many examples that were mentioned here in terms of interventions. But I would like to say security of supply should trump everything. This is why I also agree with the fact that when it comes to the power supply in South Africa, our most dominant supplier is Eskom. And therefore, attention to Eskom is critical. Over 90% of capacity comes from Eskom. So why are we fiddling around with other things when Eskom is falling apart? That's number two. So that talks to that security of supply. I also want to emphasize another thing, that we say the president goes to Davos, comes back, and whatever, comes back with solutions, but we never get anywhere. Why are we not getting anywhere? Yes, implementation is the problem, but why is implementation the problem? Firstly, I think we don't have enough accountability with the state-owned enterprise that we have, which is Eskom. And when I say that, I include the corporate governance issues, because solving an Eskom issue, yes, it's a technical issue, but it's all round. It's more than just technical. It's financial, it's commercial, it's all of the things. It's human capital. And we don't have accountability. We have a contract at Eskom that says, between this time and this time, this is what we're going to achieve. But we let that slip and listen to all sorts of excuses about sabotage and all sorts of things. That's just not good enough. So I think that's one of the things. Secondly, from a government point of view as well, I would say that we have slipped up, I'm afraid. We knew about the Eskom debt that is almost 400 billion a long time ago. Yes, we are coming up with solutions, but what we need to understand, infrastructure is a long-term game. Planning is a long-term. You're running around scrambling, trying to find out what can you do. Every day we're asked on TV, what can we do? We cannot do anything that's short-term. We have to work in advance, in anticipation of problems, not when the problems arise. We should have been working on this years ago. I used to be in energy planning at the then Department of Minerals and Energy, where we talked about Inga, for instance. In 1998, we talked about Inga. I know that from a policy point of view, you can have Inga in your IRP, but the question is, now I'm talking about implementation. Can you implement it? I don't think so. I did not think so when it was in the IRP then. Why? You need transmission infrastructure that comes all the way from the DRC, crosses Zambia, goes to Zimbabwe, and comes to South Africa. Is that available? Is that going to be doable? When is it going to be done? Besides the generation itself, yes, we know that the DRC has a lot of capacity of hydropower. Nobody can argue with that. But the question is it implementable, and when? I don't think that question should be asked now. I think that question should have been asked years ago. And if that's not the case, that solution should, at least some scenarios in terms of what other solutions could we come up with to replace that. Secondly, you look at the IRP again. You have Lungile alluded to 1,500 megawatts of coal-fired power fleet. Fine that day. From a technical point of view, no problem. You can do that. Can you do it commercially? No. Why? You look at your externalities. If you are a strategist, you don't just look at your technical solution. You look at your commercial solution. You look at a risk of non-implementation. Why did we not implement that 1,500 megawatts of capacity? Yes, it's environmental lobbying, but besides that, look at the funding that is available in South Africa to make projects doable. You have AFDB that has a policy that says they don't fund coal anymore. Now, is it going to be funded by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy? No. Mineral Resources and Energy comes up with a policy. Implementation comes from the industry. It comes from role players that are beyond government. So government must not think just about policy and what I can do. Go beyond and say, from a scenario point of view, What risks do we have that will make this commercially not doable and therefore not implementable, and then risk the security of supply in South Africa? You have AFDB that cannot fund that. BRICS Bank cannot fund coal. Most of the commercial banks from North Bank and all of that have come up with policies that we will not fund coal. Are we thinking about what do we do then in that case? We are not. We just say technically the megawatts can be in the system and therefore it's going to happen. No, we're setting ourselves up for failure not only for the short term, for the medium term, but also for the long term. So planning needs to be robust. Here the presidency has got a lot of people advising them, and we say they are technical people, internationally in South Africa. No, you need commercial, you need other aspects of planning that go beyond technical. Otherwise, you run the risk of having things working on paper, however, they don't work from an implementation point of view. Another one is on, just an example on the governance. Governance, we had ESCOM for a long time, not, and I'm talking now about accountability, not having enough board members on the table. Why is that? Why is that? And how do you expect that entity to perform? Right? Why was that the case? Thank God we now have a competent board that has come up with very good plans in terms of the subcommittees that they have, very focused subcommittees. There's one on performance that has never been there in the past. You also had, it's not only a technical problem that ESCOM had, sorry. You also had a financial issue within ESCOM. Financials not being released for 9 months. That's not a technical issue. And financial issues, procurement issues, technical issues, all must come together. The board recently said that internal controls within ESCOM are an issue that they need to address. Now, the CEO at ESCOM must be accountable. You can't attribute that to the DME or somebody else. And if it's not doable, I would rather see that the CEO says, listen, government, this is what we've been trying to do. It's not doable. Sorry, I'm going to resign because you are not making my job. But if you are staying there, don't come up with excuses and tell us you can't do things, because this is your responsibility. It falls on you ultimately and the board for you to be able to implement. So talking about implementation, talking about security of supply, we will talk until we are blue in the face if we don't go into details, into analyzing all the risks to implementation. Do not assume that when you have an IRP, the IRP will implement itself. It will not, as we have proven where we are. And so from the short term, just to summarize, from a short-term perspective, I agree, fix ESCOM. Fix ESCOM, make sure that we've got some availability that has increased. Kusile, we hear a lot about coal-fired power plants that are old. Kusile is not that old, it's less than 10 years. And it's got 3 units that are out, and it's not, these units are not it's because of a current problem. 3 units. If you multiply 700 megawatts of each unit, 7 times 7 times 7, that you know the maths. That's capacity that's available. And then you have Unit 4. Unit 4 is not because the coal-fired power plant is old. It's not because of the past. It was commissioned, and it was in the process of being back into the system and reliably supplying electricity. That's another 700 megawatts. Already you've kicked out load shedding of stage 2. That's probably 2,400 megawatts or something like that. You've already now sorted out stage 2. And we are here, things are getting worse. And we blame it on old coal-fired power plants. And I'm telling you, these 2 examples have nothing to do with the age of the plants. So we need accountability in South Africa. We need to take things seriously. We need to be bold, and we need to look beyond, in terms of accountability, we need to look at all the role players, all of them, government included. Don't come up with the IRP which you have not stress tested. Stress test that, see what will potentially be a problem in the future, and let's try to mitigate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lunkile and Ruse. Dr. Mate is online and he's ready to present, and I think that will help us so that when we take questions, we take questions and then close. And the BBC, I think you remember, we've been saying Eskom, when they hire a new CEO, they should not hire a complainer. Because the outgoing one, I don't know why they're keeping him there in the first place, because he doesn't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's handing over. He came there, he's telling us what we know. You know, when you hire a CEO, you hire a CEO to say, come and solve the problems, not come and tell us the problems that we know. The reason why we hire the CEO is because we realize there are problems. The CEO must come and solve the problems, not to tell us what we know every day and complain. There are so many complaints. The coal is wet and this. So the new board of Eskom, which we think is solid, they should make sure that they hire the right person who will come there and solve the problem. And I think maybe when we answer the questions, maybe just say something about energy experts. You know, in South Africa now, everyone is an energy expert. I can wake up and claim to be an energy expert. No one questions my credentials. No one checks my qualifications, my experience. Especially when you are white, then you are just an energy expert. You wake up, you are an energy expert. So I think we need to also deal with that issue. And I think, hence, all the white energy experts are saying Mantashe must be removed. And you can see it's a coordinated thing to say we're in load shedding stage 6 because of Mantashe. But Mantashe has got nothing to do with fixing us. But the minister who's supposed to be held accountable, no one says anything about it. The energy experts, the so-called energy experts, are saying nothing about it. But you are not here to listen to me. Dr. Mate, are you ready? Over to you. You can sort out the speakers there.
Thank you, Program Director. Can you hear me?
The landlord, if you can please help us with the lights.
Can you hear me, Program Director?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, okay. And can you see my slides? Can I just confirm, Ntate Matabane, whether you can see my slides?
Yeah, we can see the slides, we can hear you.
All right, okay. Thank you for the opportunity. I think this is really a privilege for me to address this forum. We are faced with a